Before we begin, I need you to hear something. A unit of 63 elite soldiers, one woman, and a 41-page report that nobody asked for, written alone, in the dark, after weeks of being ignored, mocked, and told she didn't belong. That report saved every single one of them. This is not a story about being liked. This is not a story about being accepted. This is a story about what happens when you stop waiting for a room to respect you and you make it impossible for them not to. Her name was Sergeant Maya Hartwell, and the day she walked through those gates, nobody came to greet her. That was the first sign. The morning Sergeant Maya Hartwell walked through the gates of Firebase Kilo, the temperature was 104 degrees. Nobody came to greet her. That was the first sign. She had driven 4 hours through dust and heat with one duffel bag, one set of orders, and one name: Staff Sergeant Daniel Brick Briggs, the man who was supposed to sign her in. He wasn't at the gate. Nobody was. Just a bored private who glanced at her orders, looked her up and down, and said 3 words that would follow her for the next 6 months. "You're a mistake." He didn't mean it as an insult. He genuinely believed it. He thought someone in HR had made a clerical error, that a female combat intelligence analyst had been assigned to the 3rd Ranger Support Battalion by accident. He actually picked up the phone to call it in while she stood there, bag on her shoulder, sweat dripping down her neck, saying nothing. She said nothing because she had been warned. Her commander back at Fort Bragg, a woman who had survived 17 years in spaces that didn't want her, had sat across from Maya 2 weeks before deployment and said, "They're going to make you feel like a ghost, like you're not there. Don't react. Don't defend yourself. Just work." Maya had nodded. She hadn't fully understood what that meant until now. Firebase Kilo was a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan, home to 63 men who had trained together, bled together, and built the kind of tight unit culture that outsiders rarely understood. They had their own language, inside jokes that went back years, nicknames earned through moments Maya hadn't witnessed, a rhythm of trust that took months to build. She was not part of that rhythm. She was not part of anything. When she was finally shown to her bunk, a corner space near the generator, far from everyone else, loud and hot and obviously an afterthought, she unpacked her bag without complaint. She set up her laptop, she arranged her files. She ate dinner alone at the end of the table while 14 men had a loud, laughing conversation 30 feet away, and not one of them looked in her direction. She was not invisible. Invisible would have been easier. She was seen and deliberately ignored. There is a difference. One is an absence of attention. The other is a statement. The statement got louder the next morning. Physical training at 0500. She fell in at the back of the formation. Staff Sergeant Briggs, a wall of a man with a jaw like a cinder block and eyes that communicated very little warmth, walked the line and stopped when he reached her. He looked at her for a long moment. "Intel support doesn't run with us," he said. "I know," Maya said. "I want to." Silence. "You want to," he repeated, like she'd said something in a foreign language. "Yes, Sergeant." He stared at her for another 3 seconds, the kind of stare designed to make someone reconsider, and then he shrugged and walked away. Not a yes, not a no. Just an indifference so complete it was almost impressive. She ran anyway. 6 miles in full kit through dust and pre-dawn heat. She didn't finish first, she didn't finish last. She finished in the middle of the pack, said nothing, and went to the intel tent to start her actual job. Nobody mentioned it. The work itself was where Maya was supposed to live. Pattern of life analysis, signals data, threat mapping. She was good at it, better than good. She had graduated top of her class at the Intelligence Center, had spent 2 years doing analysis work that her supervisors described as unusually precise. She could look at a week of seemingly random movement data and find the pattern that everyone else had missed. She found one on her 3rd day. A local supply route that the unit had been using for 6 months had a new variable. A cell phone signal that appeared twice a week, always within 40 meters of the road, always between 0600 and 0700. It didn't match any registered local contact. It didn't match any known pattern. It was small, easy to miss, the kind of thing that got buried under bigger priorities. Maya flagged it, wrote it up, submitted it through the proper channel to Briggs. He read it. He set it aside. She saw him set it aside through the open tent flap, watched him put her report under a stack of other papers without a word. She went back to her desk and started building a stronger case. That evening, she overheard the conversation she had been expecting. 2 soldiers outside the tent. She caught pieces. Her name, laughter. Something about the desk ornament. Something about what happens when command sends you a problem instead of a person. She sat very still and stared at her screen. Her father had been a soldier. 22 years. He used to say that the hardest battle was the one you fought before the enemy ever showed up. The battle against your own anger, your own need to be understood, your own voice screaming that this isn't fair. You win that battle first, he used to say. Then you go win the real one. Maya closed her laptop. She had the signal data. She had the pattern. She had the analysis. They weren't ready to listen yet, but they would be. What Maya didn't know that night, what none of them knew, was that the signal she had flagged would become the most important piece of intelligence produced by Firebase Kilo in 8 months, and that the moment her report got ignored would become the moment Staff Sergeant Briggs would replay in his mind for the rest of his career. But that was still coming. First, they were going to make it much, much worse. 3 weeks into her assignment at Firebase Kilo, Maya Hartwell stopped eating breakfast with the unit. Not because she was told to, because she had done the math. Every morning she walked into that mess hall, she spent calories. Not food calories, emotional ones. The kind that drained from a person slowly, invisibly, like a battery with a small leak. The deliberate gap that appeared when she sat down, the conversations that lowered in volume, the eye contact that never came. She had tried in those first weeks to insert herself. A comment here, a question there, the small social gestures that humans use to say, I am here, I am one of you. Every single one had landed like a stone dropped into sand. No ripple. No response, just absorption and silence. So she stopped trying. She ate at 0430, alone, before anyone else arrived. She told herself it was efficiency. It was not efficiency. The signal anomaly she had flagged was still sitting under Briggs's stack of papers. She knew because she checked, not the papers, but the official log. Her report had been received, time-stamped, and filed, not acted upon, not forwarded, not even questioned, just filed in the digital equivalent of a drawer that nobody opened. She submitted a follow-up on day 18, same result. On day 22, she did something that took more courage than the 6-mile run on day 1. She knocked on the frame of Briggs's open tent and waited. He looked up. The signal pattern I flagged, she said. It's increased. 3 appearances last week instead of 2. Same window, same proximity to the route. I think someone is doing pre-attack surveillance, and I think the timeline is compressing. Briggs looked at her the way a man looks at a ceiling fan, aware of its presence, unbothered by it. I'll take a look, he said. He looked back down at his work before the sentence was finished. She stood there for 1 more second, 1 second of pure, quiet humiliation, and then she turned and walked back to her tent. "I'll take a look" was the same as nothing. She had been in the army long enough to know the difference between a man who would take a look and a man who said he would. Briggs was the second kind. It was Corporal Jesse Tatum who finally said it out loud. Tatum was 24 years old, had been with the unit for 11 months, and had apparently decided that the unspoken rule, ignore her, don't engage, don't acknowledge, was taking too long. He wanted it resolved faster. It happened in the intel tent on a Tuesday afternoon. Maya was at her station. Tatum came in to pull a map reference, stood behind her for a moment longer than necessary, and then said, not to her, but to the air in front of him, loud enough that there was no confusion about the intended audience, "I had a dog once that used to follow us around the yard. Didn't belong with us. Just showed up one day and wouldn't leave. Dad kept saying it would figure out on its own that it wasn't wanted." He pulled his map. He left. Maya stared at her screen. Her hands, she noticed, were completely still. She had expected them to shake. They didn't. Instead, she felt something settle in her chest, a cold, quiet thing that had no name, but felt like a door closing. Not slamming. Closing. The careful, deliberate kind. She thought about calling her mother. She thought about the complaint process, the forms, the investigation, the label that would follow her for the rest of her career. The one who couldn't handle it. She thought about the female officer back at Bragg who had warned her, and she thought about her father's voice, and then she stopped thinking about all of it. She opened a new document. She started building the most complete threat analysis report she had ever written. If they would not listen to a flag, she would build something they could not set aside. She worked for 11 hours straight. She pulled every piece of signals data from the past 4 months, not just her flagged anomaly, but everything adjacent to it. Cell patterns, vehicle movement logs, local informant reports that had been collected but not cross-referenced. She ran a temporal analysis, mapping each data point against time of day of week, weather conditions, and proximity to the supply route. The picture that emerged was not ambiguous. Someone had been watching that road for a long time. The early signals, 2 months before Maya had even arrived, were sparse, exploratory. The pattern had grown denser, more confident, more precise. Whoever was doing it had learned the unit's schedule. They knew the window, and based on the compression Maya had identified, they were close to acting on what they had learned. She printed the report at 0300, 41 pages. Maps, timelines, confidence intervals, 3 separate appendices. She put it on Briggs's desk. She went to her bunk and lay down without sleeping. At 0600, she heard voices. Briggs, another officer, Captain Reeves, the company commander, whose voice Maya recognized from briefings. She couldn't make out words at first. Then she could. "Where did this come from?" "Hartwell." A pause. "The intel analyst?" "Yes, sir." Another pause, longer this time. "This is 41 pages, Briggs." "Yes, sir." "Did you know she was building this?" Silence. She heard Briggs exhale, occasionally making a note. He read the way people read when they are genuinely unsettled by what they are seeing. Not skimming, not performing attention, but actually absorbing. When he finished, he set it down and looked at her. "How confident are you in this timeline?" he asked. 78 to 83%, she said, based on current data. If the signal appears again this week, that number goes above 90. Reeves nodded slowly. "You flagged this 3 weeks ago." It was not a question. Maya said nothing. He looked at the report again, then at her. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "This unit owes you an apology." Maya held his gaze. "I don't need an apology, sir," she said. "I need someone to act on this before Thursday." Reeves stared at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his radio. What happened on Thursday would change everything, for the unit, for the mission, and for every man who had ever made Maya Hartwell eat breakfast alone. But before Thursday came, someone in that unit was going to make one final, catastrophic mistake. and his name was Tatum. Wednesday night, someone slid a note under Maya's tent flap. She found it at 2200 when she came back from the communications hub. A folded piece of paper, no name on the outside. She picked it up, unfolded it, and read 4 words written in block letters. "Stay out of Thursday." She stood with it in her hand for a moment. Then she folded it back up, placed it in her left breast pocket, and went to sleep. She knew who had written it. Tatum's handwriting matched the block letter style she had seen on the unit's informal sign-out board, the one where soldiers scrawled their location in dry erase marker when they left the wire. She had cataloged it unconsciously, the way she cataloged everything, the quiet habit of a person who had learned to read her environment very carefully. She didn't report the note, not because she was afraid, not because she thought it was harmless, because she understood what it meant and what it didn't mean. It meant Tatum was scared, not of her, but of what her report represented. If her analysis was right, then the unit had missed something for months, something that had been sitting in the data waiting to be read. And if a woman who had been eating breakfast alone since week 2 found it, had built a 41-page case around it while being treated like furniture, then what did that say about everyone else? The note wasn't a threat, it was panic wearing the mask of a threat. She filed that understanding away and slept 6 hours. Thursday began before the sun. Captain Reeves had moved fast after their 0800 meeting, the kind of fast that told Maya he had recognized not just the intelligence value of her report, but the time pressure embedded in it. He had spent Wednesday running her analysis past the battalion intelligence officer, cross-referencing it with regional threat data, and quietly repositioning assets without alerting the broader unit to the change in posture. At 0430 Thursday, he briefed a select team of 8. Maya was in the room. She stood at the back, near the map board she had built, and she watched the faces of the men as Reeves walked through her findings. Some of them she recognized, veterans who had been with the unit for years, whose skepticism she had felt every day for 3 weeks. She watched their expressions move through the same sequence: mild impatience, reluctant attention, growing focus, and then, one by one, the particular stillness that comes over a soldier when he realizes the situation is real. Briggs was in the room. He did not look at her during the briefing. He looked at the map. He looked at it with the focused, unblinking attention of a man doing a private reckoning. Tatum was not in the room. Reeves had made that decision himself, and he had made it without explaining it to anyone. The plan was clean. Maya's analysis had identified 2 probable surveillance positions within 40 meters of the supply route: elevated ground on the eastern ridge and a shallow depression behind an abandoned agricultural structure 400 meters to the north. The signal compression she had tracked suggested the next observation window would open between 0610 and 0640. The team would be in position before 0600. Reeves gave the brief in 11 minutes. Assignments, comms, rules of engagement, contingency. At the end, he looked around the room and said the thing that commanders say when they want a team to understand that the information in front of them is not theoretical. "This is not a drill," he said. "The analysis is solid. Trust it." Nobody asked who had produced the analysis. Nobody had to. Maya's role was not in the field. She was stationed in the operations center with a radio and a live feed from the team's body cameras. A small, hot room with 3 monitors and a communications sergeant named Torres who handed her a cup of coffee when she sat down and said nothing else. She appreciated the nothing else. At 0552, the team went silent, radio discipline. She watched the body cam feeds, dark shapes moving through pre-dawn gray, the ridgeline emerging slowly as ambient light built. The supply road was empty, dust, stillness, a landscape that gave nothing away. At 0608, Torres tapped her arm. "Signal's up," he said quietly, reading from the intercept panel. "Bearing consistent with your eastern ridge position." Maya leaned forward. "Where exactly?" He pointed to the coordinates on the screen. She looked at them, looked at her map, looked back. "That's 12 meters off my primary estimate," she said, inside the margin. Torres nodded. She keyed the radio. "Reeves, signal is active. Eastern Ridge. You're looking at the rock formation, second cluster from the north." A pause. Then Reeves' voice, low and flat. "We see him." What followed took 4 minutes. She watched it on the body cam feeds without breathing. The careful, practiced movement of men who had trained for exactly this, closing distance on a position that did not yet know it had been found. One figure on the ridge, one cell phone, one man who had been watching that road for 2 months and had finally run out of time. He was taken without a shot fired. When Reeves' voice came back over the radio, it carried the particular quality of controlled relief, the sound of a man who had believed the intelligence but had still been holding his breath. "Target secure. Good call, Hartwell." She sat back in her chair. Torres looked at her. He was smiling, a small, genuine thing. She did not smile back immediately. She stared at the monitor for a moment, at the ridge where 8 men were now moving in organized silence, and she felt something she had not felt in 3 weeks. Solid ground. Not triumph, not vindication. Something quieter and more durable than either of those things. Ground. Back at the firebase, the debrief lasted 2 hours. She sat at the table this time, not the back of the room, not near the door, but at the table, in a chair that Reeves had placed deliberately at his right hand. She answered questions. She walked through her methodology. She showed the team the data thread that had started with a single anomalous signal on her 3rd day and had ended on an eastern ridge at 0612 on a Thursday morning. The room was quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Before, the quiet had been exclusion, the sound of a space refusing to include her. This quiet was attention. She had been in enough rooms to know the difference. At the end of the debrief, Briggs spoke for the first time. He had been silent for 2 hours, not the performative silence of a man waiting to speak, but the genuine silence of a man who was listening. He looked at the table when he said it, not at her. "The first flag, 3 weeks ago. I should have moved on it." The room absorbed that. Maya looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said, "you should have." No softening, no reassurance, just the truth, delivered without cruelty. Briggs nodded once. It was the most honest exchange they had ever had. She found the note from the night before in her pocket when she changed out her kit that evening. "Stay out of Thursday." She looked at it for a moment. Then she put it in the burn bag. Not because she was letting it go. Not because it didn't matter. Because it was finished. The chapter it belonged to was over. What came next was something else entirely. Tatum had watched the debrief from outside the tent. He had not been invited in. He had stood at the edge, listening through the canvas, and he had heard every word, including Briggs's admission, including Maya's answer, including the sound of a room that had finally decided what she was worth. He had a decision to make, and the decision he made would determine whether he left Firebase Kilo with his integrity or without it. Tatum didn't sleep Thursday night. Maya knew this because she didn't sleep either, and at 0200, when she walked to the water station outside the mess hall, she saw him sitting on an ammunition crate near the eastern perimeter wall, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing in particular. He was still in his kit. He hadn't cleaned up after the day. He looked like a man who had been sitting in the same position for several hours and had not noticed. She filled her water bottle. She walked back past him. She stopped. Not because she felt sorry for him, not because the note in the burn bag was forgotten. It wasn't, and would not be for a long time. She stopped because she recognized what she was looking at. She had seen it before, in training, in the mirror during her 2nd week at Firebase Kilo. It was the specific posture of a person who had run out of the story they had been telling themselves. Tatum had been telling himself a story, that she didn't belong, that her presence was a disruption, that his resistance was a form of protection for something worth protecting. Thursday had taken that story apart piece by piece and left him sitting on an ammunition crate at 0200 with nothing to replace it. She knew that feeling. She didn't enjoy seeing it in him. "Drink water. You look dehydrated." She walked back to her tent without waiting for a response. Friday morning, something shifted. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a dramatic scene, no speech, no formal moment of reckoning, no single gesture that rewrote the past 3 weeks. It happened the way most real things happen, in small increments that only become visible when you look back at them from a distance. It started with Torres. He had been there in the operations center on Thursday. He had handed her coffee and said nothing, and watched her work, and apparently what he had seen had settled something in him. At 0600 Friday, he pulled a chair up next to her station in the intel tent, not across from her, next to her, and set down a stack of regional signals reports. "I've been looking at the southern corridor," he said. "Want to tell me if I'm reading this right?" She looked at the reports. She told him where he was right and where he wasn't. They worked for 2 hours. Nobody commented on it. Nobody had to. Briggs came at 0900. He didn't sit down. He stood at the entrance to the tent in the way that large, formal men stand when they are doing something that does not come naturally to them. Weight distributed, jaw set, eyes direct. He had clearly thought about what he was going to say and had decided to say it simply. "I want to walk through your methodology," he said. "The full thread, from the first flag to Thursday." Maya looked at him. "Why?" she asked. "Because I need to understand how I missed it," he said. "And because the next time something like this comes across my desk, I don't want to miss it again." It was not an apology. It was better than an apology. An apology was about the past. This was about the future, a man deciding to be different because he had seen the cost of being who he was. She pulled up her files. They spent 3 hours going through every step. Tatum came last. It was late afternoon, the light going amber over the ridgeline, the firebase settling into the quieter rhythm of early evening. Maya was outside the intel tent running a calibration check on the antenna array when she heard footsteps and turned to find him standing 6 feet away. He looked worse than he had at 0200. He had slept eventually, she could tell, but the sleep hadn't helped the way he'd hoped. There were things sleep couldn't fix. He didn't have anything in his hands. He stood with them at his sides, which for a soldier is the posture of a person who has deliberately made themselves unarmed. "The dog story," he said. Maya waited. "That was—" He stopped, started again. "There's no version of that where I was right. I've been trying to find one since yesterday morning, and there isn't one." She looked at him steadily. "No," she said, "there isn't. I was wrong about you from the start." He said it without decoration, without the softening qualifiers that people usually attach to admissions like this to make them easier to deliver. "Not just wrong, I was deliberately wrong. I wanted to be wrong about you. It was easier." Maya set down the calibration tool. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you deserve to hear it," he said. "And because I don't want to be the person who said those things anymore." She studied him for a moment, not to make him uncomfortable, but because she was deciding something. She was deciding what kind of weight she wanted to carry out of this place when her assignment ended. Tatum's dilt, held like a trophy, or something lighter. She had always been better at traveling light. "Then be someone else," she said simply. "Starting now." She picked up the calibration tool and went back to work. Tatum stood there for a moment longer. Then he nodded, to her, to himself, to something she couldn't see, and walked away. The weeks that followed were different. Not perfect, not transformed overnight into something frictionless and warm. Real change doesn't move that way. It moves through awkward silences and recalibrated habits and the slow, grinding work of people deciding, one interaction at a time, to do better than they did before, but different. Torres became a genuine collaborator, sharp, curious, the kind of analyst's partner who challenged her conclusions in ways that made them stronger. Two other soldiers from the original formation began stopping by the intel tent not because they needed something, but because the work happening there had become, quietly, the most consequential work on the firebase. Briggs restructured the intelligence review process. Every flag, every anomaly, every report, regardless of who produced it, went through a formal 48-hour review cycle with documented follow-up. He implemented it without fanfare, without a speech. He just changed the process. Maya found out when she submitted her next report and received a formal acknowledgement within 6 hours. She stared at that acknowledgement for a long time. On her last day at Firebase Kilo, reassignment orders, new posting, 3 months after she had arrived with one duffel bag and been told by a board private that she was a mistake, Captain Reeves called her into his office one final time. He was standing when she entered, not behind his desk, standing in the middle of the room, which was unusual enough that she noticed it. "I want to tell you something before you leave," he said. "Not for the record, just between us." She waited. "When I read that 41-page report," he said, "my first thought wasn't about the intelligence value. My first thought was, how does a person produce something like this while being treated the way you were treated in this unit?" He paused. "I don't have an answer to that. I just want you to know that I asked myself the question." Maya held his gaze. "The answer," she said quietly, "is that you stop waiting for the room to change. You do the work. The room catches up or it doesn't, but the work is yours either way." Reeves was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to remember that," he said. "Good," she said. "Use it." She walked out of Firebase Kilo the same way she had walked in. One duffel bag, morning heat, dust on every surface. This time, people came to the gate. Not all 63, but enough. Torres, 2 soldiers from the formation, a private she had helped with a signals problem 3 weeks and who had never forgotten it. They stood at the gate without ceremony. No salutes, no speeches, just presence. The simple, unambiguous act of showing up to say, "You were here, you mattered, we know it now." Briggs was there. He didn't say anything. He extended his hand. She shook it. She threw her bag in the vehicle, got in, and didn't look back. Not because she was cold, not because it hadn't mattered, but because she was already thinking about the next posting, the next data set, the next room that didn't know yet what she was worth. She would show them. She always did. Some people enter a space and change it by demanding to be seen. Maya Hartwell entered a space and changed it by refusing to be anything less than excellent, until the space had no choice but to see her. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If Maya's story hit different, if you've ever walked into a room that didn't want you there and had to decide whether to fold or to work, then you already know what this story is really about. It's not just about the military. It's about every person who has ever been underestimated, overlooked, or handed a corner bunk near the generator and told, without words, that they don't belong. Maya didn't argue. She didn't quit. She built a 41-page case in the dark and put it on the desk of the man who had ignored her. That's the only answer that lasts. If this story meant something to you, subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly this. Stories about people who were counted out and refused to stay counted. Every week, a new story. Every week, someone who showed up anyway. Hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been in a room that didn't want you? What did you do? The next story is already waiting.